say to our witnesses, thank you for being here, for standing up and showing us your courage. I'd like to focus a couple of questions and ask Ms. Gaines to respond. You know, the evening that the attack on you happened, I mean, I think the whole country thought, how is this possible? You've had the courage to speak out on an issue that is very personal to you. I have 3 daughters, and to think about the issue that you're talking about and standing up for what you believe in, the freedom of speech, the First Amendment protects your ability to do that. And yet, San Francisco State University President Lynn Mahoney wrote a letter sympathizing those who attacked you. And I can't imagine how that has made you feel. I know how it's made me feel.
No, it's we've used the term domestic terrorists a lot in this hearing, and that's constantly something I get called by these same left-leaning protesters who, again, for simply saying women deserve fairness, we deserve safety, and we deserve privacy, and we deserve respect. And I get called a domestic terrorist all the time. So this term for me, maybe I have a skewed perception of what it means. But yes, it's been, I don't know, again, it's just disheartening to be in the position I'm in, feeling like I'm asking for the bare minimum, feeling like I'm asking for something that is so simple that we all are entitled to, yet I'm being, held hostage. And there's one more piece I wanted to mention about this night that I haven't really touched on. I briefly touched on it in my testimony, but the verbiage outside the room, when I was still giving my speech, these protesters, the video doesn't do a good job showing of just how many were in these stairways. I mean, it was hundreds of people. But these people, they were outside the rooms, and one side of the hallway would yell, trans rights are under attack, and the other side would yell back, what do? We fight back. And they kept using the term, we fight back. And so after I'd finally been barricaded and I was in this room for a couple hours, and they kept saying it, I'm like, why do they keep saying we fight back? And we've talked a lot about this stemming from the top in regards to Trump and January 6th and Tucker Carlson giving the license to people to basically do whatever they want but we're not talking about this on this side of it, because the day before this incident at San Francisco State, the Biden administration press secretary had a press release, a press conference where she says word for word, our trans community is resilient and they fight back. And I find it so ironic they were using the exact same verbiage, we fight back. They kept saying it continuously. And so I wanted to put that on the record because we've talked about it a lot stemming from the top on the other side, but I think it's crucial to understand that goes both ways.
Well, Ms. Gaines, thank you for your courage. Thank you for standing up for what you believe in. Any sort of threats or violence or intimidation is despicable. It has no place in our society. And to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, real courage lies in being able to stand up even when it's not popular, and even when you may not agree with it, but being able to stand up to a bully, and that's what this is. This is about a bully in our society for a narrative that some don't agree with, and it doesn't matter which side you stand on, but you have stood up to that bully, and I applaud you for doing that. And the country is watching you and your leadership, and we appreciate what you're doing. Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding this hearing and standing up to a bully. We should all condemn any violence that happens.
Senator Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Madam Secretary.
Thank you.
Madam Secretary, isn't it a fact that the President's proposed budget for next fiscal year is $500 billion more than this fiscal year?
On the spending side?
Yes. That's what a budget is.
Yeah. It is about $400 billion.
It's about $500 billion more, right?
It's about what?
$500 billion more, right?
About that.
Isn't it a fact that since 2019 until today, I'm not including the extra $500 billion that y'all want to spend, since 2019 through today, U.S. population has increased 1.8%, and the federal government's budget is up 55%. Isn't that a fact?
Well, we had a pandemic.
Isn't that a fact, though? Are my numbers right?
I don't know those numbers.
You don't know? You never looked at that?
I don't have those numbers in my head. I'm not disputing them.
Okay. Isn't it a fact that the president's proposed budget proposes $4.7 trillion in new taxes?
It does propose significant additional taxes, yes.
4.7 trillion?
Something like that, yes.
Okay. You talked about reducing deficit. Isn't it a fact that under President Biden's proposed budget, that gross debt will rise from $32.7 trillion at the close of this year to $51 trillion by 2033?
I'm sorry, what number did you give me for?
The president's proposed budget will increase gross debt from $33 trillion at the close of this year to $51 trillion in 2033. Isn't that correct?
Well, debt held by the public, which is,
No, ma'am, that's gross debt. Isn't that a fact?
that's probably a fact.
So you haven't reduced the deficit, have you?
The deficit, the debt and deficits are reduced by the president's
How
budget.
can you go from $33 trillion to $51 trillion and call that a reduction in the deficit?
Because that's a calculation for which you need a baseline, and then you compare the budget and the deficits and debt in the budget with a baseline in which there are none of the changes, either in revenues or in spending, that are proposed
Here's my
in the
baseline.
budget.
Here's my baseline. At the end of this year, we project people a lot smarter than me, probably not than you, but smarter than me, say that gross debt's $33 trillion. They say if the president's budget is implemented by 2033, it'll be $51 trillion. Isn't that a fact?
If the president's budget is not implemented and none of the changes are made, it will be worse than that. And so the president's budget has improved the fiscal outlook relative to what we would have without the president's proposals.
Even though it raises gross debt from $33 trillion to $51 trillion, you say that's an improvement.
It is an improvement because it raises taxes by more, and it leads to...
That includes taxes. In what world is that an improvement, other than Washington and long land?
It's an improvement in that the revenue increases far exceed proposed investments.
Okay. All right, let me ask you this. Isn't it a fact that in January of 2019, the Federal Reserve issued a warning to Silicon Valley Bank over its risk management systems?
I have no idea. I'm not responsible in any way.
But you're in charge of the banking bailouts and the crisis, right?
I am not involved in banking supervision, and I don't have access to any information about the supervision of Silicon Valley Bank.
Okay, so you don't know whether or not the Fed, you haven't looked to see whether or not the Fed issued a warning, 4 years ago to the bank over its risk management systems?
That's not public information, and it's not
Sure it is.
information.
It's in the Wall Street Journal.
Well, it may be in the Wall Street Journal, but it's not public information, and it's not information that I have access to.
Well, I'll give you a copy of this article.
I've read the article, but...
The Fed issued a matter requiring attention, and it said your risk management practices are terrible, and you need
the
to
article
improve.
says.
Right. Isn't it a fact that months before SVB went under, that the bank disclosed that its mark-to-market value of its bonds was $16 billion less than their balance sheet value?
They did make such a statement.
Did the people at the Federal Reserve just not read it?
I'm not at the Federal Reserve.
I know.
I was at the Federal Reserve.
But you're at the Treasury, and you're in charge of the banking crisis. Let me ask you.
I am not in charge of the supervision of the bank.
Let me ask you this. Senator Hinder talked about the 2018 amendments to the Dodd-Frank Act. Isn't it a fact? Now, SVB was not stress tested in 2022. 34 banks were. Here's the Fed's report. Isn't it a fact that if SVB had been stress tested, it would have passed?
Stress tests look at capital of a bank.
Here's the yes, ma'am.